Welcome back to our news bulletin. We start from US President Donald Trump, who says he will meet Taliban leaders in the near future. The statement comes after Washington signed a historic peace deal with the group on Saturday in Doha to end the Afghan war. Speaking at the White House, Trump said the war in Afghanistan will be over if the Taliban fulfill commitments made in the agreement. The US president said everyone is tired of war. He said the United States can't be the policeman for the world.
Had tremendous success in Afghanistan in the killing of terrorists, but it's time, after all these years, to go and to bring our people back home.
Meanwhile, the Taliban have started diplomatic outreach by meeting envoys from Turkey, Russia, Indonesia and Norway in Doha. Taliban spokesperson Zabiullah said dignitaries who met Mullah Baradar expressed their commitments for Afghanistan's reconstruction. More in this bulletin. In a related development, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani says he is optimistic about a permanent ceasefire with the Taliban. He said this while speaking along with U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper in Kabul. He said Kabul values the cooperation of Pakistan and other Islamic countries in bringing peace and stability in Afghanistan. The president said Afghan people have made great sacrifices for peace. He said 10 million people of Afghanistan had to migrate during the last 2 decades. Ghani hopes that the deal will lead to a permanent ceasefire through the intra-Afghan talks. Meanwhile, Afghanistan has been in a state of war for decades. Now, after the signing of a deal between the US and the Taliban, many Afghans consider it as an important step towards sustainable peace. Let's take a look at their reaction to the development in this report.
A landmark peace deal between the US and Taliban has been signed in Doha, raising hopes for a sustainable intra-Afghan dialogue. This could result in an end to the deadly 19-year-old conflict. Many Afghans hope the development will bring peace to the country.
I think it was a very important step towards peace and stability in Afghanistan, and we have to be optimistic towards the next step.
We are delighted because of the peace process between the US and Taliban, which resulted after 18 months today.
The Afghan president's spokesperson Sadiq Siddiqui says the peace process is conditional and the Taliban will have to abandon violence.
So the agreement with the Taliban is based on conditions. The important condition is for the Taliban to abandon violence, and they enter into a peace process in which it can guarantee a sustainable peace. If the Taliban does not abide by those conditions, of course, the Afghan government and the security forces, we are all ready to defend this country.
Experts say the US-Taliban deal is a first milestone in the Afghan peace process.
The most important aspect of this agreement is that it's the first concrete milestone in an Afghan peace process. There have been efforts over a decade now to try to get a peace process launched, and this is the first tangible outcome of those efforts. Now, whether it actually sticks and whether it produces actual peace in Afghanistan remains to be seen.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has also heralded the agreement as an important step towards lasting peace.
Moving on, Tajikistan is voting in the parliamentary polls, marking its first balloting since the Supreme Court banned the main opposition group in 2015. President Imam Ali Rahmo's ruling party is expected to sweep the polls as only one critical party is taking part in today's elections. The Central Election Commission said 241 candidates have been registered to participate. The sole opposition party competing for the ballot, the Social Democratic Party of Tajikistan, has never entered parliament before. President Rahmon's People's Democratic Party of Tajikistan currently dominates the chamber, holding 51 seats out of 63. At least 50% of all voters must cast their ballots for the election today to be considered valid. If the turnout is less than 50%, a new election will be called. India has imposed a curfew in some areas of northeast Meghalaya state after 2 people were killed in clashes over the new Citizenship Act. Since December 11th, 69 people have lost their lives in nationwide protests against the discriminatory law. Clashes broke out between two groups on Friday during a meeting on the Citizenship Amendment Act in East Khasi Hills district. Meanwhile, the Indian government has ordered a Polish student from Jadavpur University to leave the country within 15 days for participating in the protests. Indian police have also registered 22 FIRs against anti-CAA protest in Aligarh district of Uttar Pradesh state. The northern states officials have issued 500 notices to the protesters since February 23rd. Hundreds of Indian Americans and British Indians have held protests against the mob violence targeting Muslims in New Delhi. 42 people, mostly Muslims, have been killed in clashes during protests against the controversial Citizenship Act. In the U.S., demonstrators held rallies in New York, Chicago, and Atlanta, raising anti-Modi and anti-CAA slogans. Talking to media in New York, the marchers spoke of BJP's fascist ideologies that target lower caste Hindus and religious minorities. In London, the protesters asked the UK government to issue a strong condemnation of Modi government for sponsoring anti-Muslim riots. In the Delhi riots, 92 houses, 57 shops, 500 vehicles, 2 schools, 4 factories, and 4 religious places were burned down by Hindu extremists. In Myanmar, 3 Rohingya Muslims have been killed and 10 others wounded after an artillery shell hit a village in the western Rakhine state. Officials say the incident occurred when the anti-Muslim Buddhist Arakan army attacked a military convoy. They said 2 of the victims were 18 and 19-year-old Rohingya boys from the Butalene village, while the other victim was a 60-year-old Rohingya woman. Rakhine has seen armed fighting on a daily basis since the Arakan army launched attacks on police outposts in 2017. The Rohingya have faced heightened fears of attacks since 2012. Muhyiddin Yassin has been sworn in as Malaysia's new Prime Minister a week after Mahathir Mohamad stepped down. The 72-year-old former Interior Minister is the 8th Premier of the Southeast Asian nation. He was sworn in at a palace ceremony in front of King Abdullah. Reacting to the development, Mahathir promised to seek a vote in Parliament to challenge Muhyiddin's support. Talking to media in Kuala Lumpur, Mahathir said Muhyiddin did not have support from most of the country's 222 MPs.
This is a very strange thing because the result of the 14th election should be that the winners form the government. Here we are going to see from the same election, the losers will form the government. The winners will be in the opposition.
In the U.S., former Vice President Joe Biden has won the South Carolina primary, reviving his flagging campaign for the Democratic presidential nomination. Biden's triumph has ended rival Bernie Sanders' winning streak of Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada. The race now pivots immediately to a new phase when 14 Super Tuesday states take the campaign nationwide early next week. With 99% of the ballots counted in South Carolina, Biden has 48.5% of the vote. Sanders is next with around 20%, followed by billionaire activist Tom Steyer with 11%. Biden celebrated his victory, saying he will defeat President Donald Trump if nominated by the Democrats. The states that will be voting on Super Tuesday include Alabama, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Virginia. Washington's governor has declared a state of emergency after the U.S. Capitol registered its first death by the new coronavirus. More than 60 people are sick and are being tested for the virus. Meanwhile, Australia has also reported its first fatality of a man evacuated from Japan's quarantined cruise ship. More in this report.
While China appears to have gotten a grip over the new coronavirus outbreak, the fatal disease is now ringing alarm bells in the other parts of the world. U.S. health officials say the growing number of infected people who have not visited an affected area is extremely worrisome. But President Donald Trump insists there is no reason for the public to panic.
But we're doing really well, very, very professionally handled. Our country is prepared for any circumstance. We hope it's not going to be a major circumstance. It'll be a smaller circumstance, but whatever the circumstance is, we're prepared. And I'd like to just ask and caution that the media, we would respectfully ask the media and politicians and everybody else involved not do anything to incite a panic, because there's no reason to panic at all.
After the US and Australia, Thailand has also reported its first death from coronavirus. The number of coronavirus 19 cases in Italy have also exceeded 1,000, with the death toll rising from 8 to 29 in the past 24 hours.
Persone contagiate.
At the moment, we have 1,049 people infected, 29 dead, and a total of 50 recoveries. Of those 1,049 people infected, 52% are housebound, people who have no symptoms or symptoms so mild that they don't need hospitalization.
È in isolamento.
Italy's health authorities say half of those tested positive show few to no symptoms. Meanwhile, Qatar has reported its first case of the novel coronavirus.
France has decided to cancel all public gatherings of more than 5,000 people in closed spaces. The move aims to curb the spread of new coronavirus amid a surge of cases in the country. The decision followed a special meeting of ministers to discuss the outbreak. French health minister said the novel coronavirus has infected 73 people in the country. 2 people have died of the epidemic. A half-marathon race scheduled for today in Paris has been cancelled. The final day of an agricultural symposium has also been called off. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. Turkey says it wants the US to send Patriot missiles for backup in Syria's northwestern province of Idlib. Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu made the comment to reporters in Doha after a meeting with US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He said Turkey and Russia are working for a lasting and binding ceasefire in Idlib. Attacks by Syrian government forces killed 55 Turkish soldiers this month in northwestern Syria. President Tayyip Erdogan has threatened to push back Syrian forces if they do not pull back to predetermined lines. Cavusoglu said the Idlib issue can only be settled in a meeting between Erdogan and Russian President Vladimir Putin.
We've been working with Russia actually for a lasting and binding ceasefire this time in Idlib. And yesterday afternoon, upon their request, our delegation met once again in Ankara. But it seems that this issue can be settled only at the meeting between President Erdogan and Putin.
In Libya, the UN-recognized government claims it struck multiple LNA targets in the south of the capital, Tripoli. In a statement, the government of National Accord said 11 targets belonging to Khalifa Haftar's forces were bombed. It said the offensive was conducted in retaliation to attacks by Haftar's forces on civilian properties in Tripoli and the Metega airport. The GNA said Haftar's forces had launched over 60 rockets at the capital, 25 of which hit the airport. Since last April, the government has been under attack by Haftar, leaving over 1,000 people dead. The French government says it will push President Emmanuel Macron's contested pension reform through Parliament by decree. This will avoid the need for a vote after the opposition filed more than 40,000 amendments to the draft law. The reform was prompted weeks of public sector strikes and protests before opponents of the legislation took the battle to the parliament. Macron loyalists branded the mountain of amendments a cynical ploy to stall the pension bill's passage through parliament. The reform aims to merge 42 sector-specific pension regimes into a single points-based system. The French government says it will be more transparent while also ensuring a more sound financial footing as the population ages. Thousands of people gathered in Moscow to mark 5 years since the murder of prominent Kremlin critic Boris Nemtsov. Organizers said the march was also a protest against planned changes to Russia's constitution. It is the first major demonstration organized by Russia's political opposition since President Vladimir Putin proposed changes to the constitution. The proposals are widely seen as a means to allow Putin to extend his grip on power after leaving the presidency. It will be put to a national vote on April 22nd. Over 22,000 people rallied in a square around 2 kilometers from the Kremlin. Demonstrators carried photos of Nemtsov and posters reading "No to Eternal Putin." Luxembourg has abolished fares for trains, trams and buses to tackle road congestion and pollution. The announcement has also been made to support the lower earners. In a statement, Transport Minister Francois Boch said all stranded class journeys on public transport are now free of charge. He said travellers still have to pay for the first-class journey at a cost of €660 a year. To cope with the increasing number of commuters, Luxembourg plans to invest nearly €4 billion in railways from 2018 to 2028. More than half of Luxembourg's greenhouse gas emissions come from transport. The UK and EU are set to begin their post-Brexit trade negotiations in Brussels tomorrow to finalize a deal before the end of the transition period. London and Brussels have already unveiled their draft documents for Brexit negotiations. The UK and EU have until June to agree a trade deal, which has to be finalized by September. They will hold talks on a range of areas from fishing and financial services, as well as controversial level playing field rules for UK. London says it is not obligated to align any of its laws with that of the EU and its institutions, including the Court of Justice. Ahead of negotiations, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has threatened a no deal if sufficient progress is not made by June. Earlier this week, the bloc said talks on post-Brexit ties will be very hard and could fail if London does not sort out the Irish border issue. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.